Hi, I'm John Newton, Chief Economist with American Farm Bureau Federation, here to talk to you about dairy revenue protection, an innovative new insurance product for dairy farmers developed by American Farm Bureau Federation and American Farm Bureau Insurance Services. The first question I'm going to ask you, before we talk about the policy and how it works, a very, very important component of the dairy industry is what is milk. Many people think of milk as just what they get in the beverage, in the jug. In reality, milk is more than just the fluid milk product that consumers see. Milk is actually composed of different ingredients. If you break milk down, it includes butterfat, protein, and other milk solids. Dairy farmers produce these various milk components, the fat, protein, and other milk solids, and these components are used by dairy food companies to produce the products that consumers enjoy in the United States. The butterfat, protein, and other solids are used to produce not only beverage milk, but yogurt, cheeses, butters, and other dairy products. So dairy farmers have invested their resources into having their animals be more productive and to produce higher content levels of fat, protein, and other milk solids. That's an important thing to remember when you think about the dairy industry, is that farmers aren't producing just milk. They're actually producing fat, protein, and other solids. And farmers are paid in the United States based on the composition of their milk. So they're not paid a standardized price for milk. They're actually paid for what's in the milk. And that's a very, very important thing to remember when thinking about dairy revenue protection and what this policy ultimately ensures, because it allows farmers to ensure the components in the milk. And every single farmer in the United States has a different component level in their milk. Some farmers have Jersey herds that have higher component levels, for example, fat contents exceeding 4.5%, higher protein levels. Because these farmers have invested in these higher component levels, they receive more money for the milk that they produce. USDA announces regulated prices every single month for butterfat, protein, and other solids. And these component prices are the same across the United States. So what really drives the difference in farmer pay prices are the different compositional standards of the milk. So farmers with higher fat content, higher protein contents get more for their milk than farmers with lower percentages of fat and protein in the milk. And it's because these fat and protein and other milk solids are ultimately used to produce cheese, butter, yogurts, and fluid milk. The value of these different dairy ingredients is what drives the farmer's milk check. And if we think about just the dairy industry in general and how it's evolved over the last 20 to 30 years, one of the things is that we notice is early in the 80s, the support mechanism for dairy farmers was based on a product price support system, meaning that USDA supported milk prices at a certain level and would buy dairy products and put them in storage in order to support a certain milk price. Congress eventually started phasing out that price support program, and as they phased it out, dairy markets became more and more volatile. In 2000, we underwent federal milk marketing order reform, or milk pricing reform, and what we did in 2000 was the price of milk became tied to cheese, butter, non-fat dry milk, and dry whey. These wholesale commodity prices were then used in formulas to come up with a value for fat, a value for protein, and a value for other solids. But one of the things that we saw is once we moved to this component-based pricing system in product price formulas in 2000, dairy markets became more and more volatile. The volatility in cheese markets and butter markets and powder markets began to influence the farmer's pay price. Because these different commodity prices move in different directions, the volatility came back to the farmer and led to more milk price volatility. Even more volatility entered the marketplace in recent years as dairy farmers really began to export more and more milk. About 15% of the U.S. milk solids is exported every single year in the form of butter, cheeses, dry milk powders. And because dairy farmers are competing in those export markets, the volatility in those markets now also influences the dairy farmer's milk price. So dairy markets have become much more volatile over the last 2 decades, And the risk management tools that dairy farmers have to deal with that currently is all margin-based tools. Things like LGM Dairy or the Margin Protection Program. Historically, dairy farmers did have a price-based safety net program called the MILC program, but that was phased out in the 2014 Farm Bill. But when you look here at the milk price, you can see the volatility in the milk prices that dairy farmers are facing. This is the U.S. average milk price going back to 2010. This is an average price of milk for the entire United States. So it's based on the value of milk in heavy cheese utilization areas and the value of milk in high fluid use areas where the milk price is higher. But this is the average value of milk and the average composition of the milk across the United States. Again, remember that every single farmer's milk price is going to be different based on what's in the milk. But you can see here, just at the U.S. national level, milk prices are very, very volatile. And farmers, since 2015, have seen their milk price cut in half. The average price of milk declined by nearly 50% from 2014 to 15 and has remained at those levels ever since. Matter of fact, when you think about what the value of the decline in the value of milk and what its impact is on dairy farmer revenue, the decline in the value of milk from 2014 to 15 represented about $15 billion in dairy farm cash receipts. And if we divide that by the number of dairy farms in the United States, that's over $300,000 per dairy farm in lost revenue because of the increased volatility in these markets that dairy farmers are facing. I indicated earlier that the risk management tools that dairy farmers have available to them prior to us developing the dairy revenue protection product, they were all margin-based tools. And the margin-based tools really came in vogue in 2008 and 9 after we saw the run-up in feed prices. You can see here in the chart the volatility in corn increased dramatically in 2006, 7, and 8. As we were adding more corn into the fuel supply, we were blending more ethanol into the gasoline supply. We also had several short crops, the drought of 2012. We saw corn prices shoot up very, very rapidly. And that led to the development of more margin-based instruments. The first thing that we saw was in 2008, the MILC program, which was the safety net that we got rid of in the 14th Farm Bill, that was reformulated to include a feed price adjuster, which meant that the support price of milk, the program payments were made to dairy farmers were based not only on the value of milk, but on the feed ingredients. In 2008, LGM Dairy was introduced. That's a margin-based insurance product offered by RMA that protects against the difference between the Class 3 milk price and Chicago corn and soybean meal futures. So farmers had a margin-based instrument. LGM also contributed to the development by the dairy industry into the current FSA program called the Margin Protection Program. That program is a margin-based safety net program offered by Farm Service Agency. Dairy farmers pay premiums for coverage, and it provides payments when the difference between the U.S. average all milk price, which we saw on an earlier chart, and the feed cost fall below certain levels. The MPP program is based on a national average margin, meaning it does not reflect any individual dairy farmer's milk production, nor does it likely reflect the components in the milk that dairy farmers have invested so much time and effort into increasing over the last several decades. So all the tools are margin-based instruments. And in traveling the country and in our Farm Bill development process, American Farm Bureau Insurance Services and American Farm Bureau decided to try to make something new that would capture the risk and better capture the farm level risk that dairy farmers face. And when we looked at it and we looked at the portfolio of tools available, we realized that most successful crop insurance products are revenue-based tools. So we thought, can we make something for dairy farmers, hence dairy revenue protection, that will provide protection against changes in dairy farm revenue? If you look at this chart here, we see that farm revenue from month to month can swing plus or minus 20%. And this is based on U.S. average dairy farm revenue, but you can see not only is the milk price very volatile, but the revenue that dairy farmers ultimately receive from month to month can change quite a bit. And so in the development of dairy revenue protection, we're seeking to address this volatility, smoothing that revenue and providing a new tool in the toolbox for dairy farmers. So if you think about what is dairy revenue protection, it's an area-based revenue insurance product that protects against quarterly declines in milk production or state-indexed milk yields. The policies are 3-month quarters. They correspond to the quarters of the calendar year. For example, January, February, March, April, May, June, October, November, December. Those calendar quarters correspond to a dairy RP insurance product. Dairy RP is going to be sold every single day, and it will be available up to 5 quarters out. So dairy farmers can choose when to buy a policy. We're going to have 2 different pricing options under dairy revenue protection. Again, indicating and highlighting the different value of milk that farmers receive based on the components in the milk. The first pricing option is going to be a mix of Class 3 and Class 4 manufacturing milk futures. The second option under dairy RP is going to be a component-based pricing option. For the component-based option, we're going to use Chicago Mercantile Exchange butter, cheese, and dry whey futures prices in the USDA end product pricing formulas to come up with a futures market implied value of butterfat, protein, and other solids. So farmers will be able to look on the day a policy is being purchased at the futures market to get an idea what type of revenue they can protect using a mix of Class 3 and Class 4 or based on the milk component value. There are very few decisions that dairy farmers are going to have to make with dairy RP. The first is which pricing option that they're going to need to make. The second is what quarter they want to cover. And then the third decision they're going to have to make is how much milk do they want to cover. A dairy farmer will choose a volume of milk to cover on the policy, and then that volume of milk will be indexed to what happens at the state level based on USDA NASS milk production information. An important component of dairy revenue protection is that the premiums are designed to be actuarially appropriate, meaning the premiums are recalculated daily based on the futures market prices and the implied volatility from the futures market. So they're actuarially appropriate. USDA will then provide a subsidy to the premium to make dairy RP more affordable for dairy farmers. So let's go back and think about how milk is really priced. That's the important component that we're able to bring to the table with dairy revenue protection. Under the LGM policy that's currently available, farmers are protecting a Class 3 milk price. But as I indicated earlier, no farmers actually paid based on the Class 3 milk price. Farmers are actually paid based on what's in the milk, the butterfat, protein, and other solids. Those component values are based on USDA survey prices of butter, cheese, non-fat dry milk, and dry whey. As you can see in this flow chart, the value of cheese flows through a USDA formula to determine the value of protein. The protein is then used to index Class 3 milk. So the Class 3 milk is really just an index value based on standard fat and standard protein levels in milk. Farmers are actually paid for the components that they produce. So many farmers throughout the United States actually have component levels higher than the standard levels and receive milk prices much higher than that average Class 3 milk price that's traded in Chicago. But as you can see here, by bringing in the components, we are able to capture more of the value of milk in the policy. That's one of the great benefits of dairy RP. It eliminates and reduces considerably the basis risk associated with just using Class 3 milk. For example, dairy farmers in California recently voted to adopt a federal milk marketing order. What that means is California dairy farmers will soon receive a price of milk based on the butterfat, protein, and other solids values that are announced by USDA. Prior to the adoption of a federal milk marketing order, California dairy farmers had a different state pricing system. They did not have a Class 3 value of milk. So immediately, dairy farmers in California had a disconnect in the value of milk that they received in California and the insurance policy available through LGM Dairy. So by bringing in the components and by California producers adopting a federal milk marketing order, they now will have a risk management tool that better aligns with the value of milk that they produce on their dairy farm. That's what we're bringing to the table with Dairy RP. And as I indicated, most farms have invested to increase their component levels. As you can see here, the standard fat level is 3.5% butterfat. The standard protein level is 2.99%. Those percentages are used to come up with that Class 3 index price that LGM Dairy uses. In our case, we're able to let the producer declare higher fat and protein levels. And you can see, on average, throughout every single month, fat content and protein contents are higher than those standard levels, meaning that dairy farmers across the country have higher fat percentages, higher protein percentages than what's in those standard values. And by being able to declare higher levels of fat or higher levels of protein in their Dairy RP policy, they can protect a higher value of milk and thus a higher revenue amount. That's one of the unique features of Dairy RP, again, is it can better align with the milk price that farmers ultimately receive. So let's think about how we're going to come up with a price guarantee under Dairy RP. Again, it's a quarterly policy, which means we're averaging the 3 months in the quarter. So if you just think here, let's just on average, let's say the first month was $18.25, second month was $18.50, and the third month was $18.75. We're going to take a simple average of that, here $18.50, and that will be the price that's used in the Dairy RP policy for the quarter. Now, farmers ultimately can choose whether to do a component pricing option or a class pricing option, but the value of milk is going to be a simple average across those 3 months. So let's look at an example. Here we see prices for Class 3 and Class 4 milk from the futures market for the fourth quarter of 2018. The average for the 3 months for Class 3 milk comes to $16.73, and the average for the 3 months on the Class 4 milk comes to $16.33. So a farmer can choose a mix anywhere between $16.33 and $16.73. A 50-50 split in this case would be a $16.53 milk price that they're using to value the Dairy RP policy. So why would a farmer choose to be higher on the Class 3 end or lower on the Class 4 end? A good example would be Wisconsin. About 85% of the milk used in Wisconsin is used to produce cheese. Cheese is used in the protein price, and it's also one of the key pricing indexes used in Class 3 milk. So a farmer in Wisconsin would likely want to wait closer to the Class 3 milk price, as that's going to reflect the movement in cheese prices that's used for milk in their area. On the other hand, if you think about in the Southeast, where a majority of the milk is used for beverage milk production, a farmer may want to allocate towards Class 3 and Class 4 to capture any potential changes in the beverage milk price. And the reason for that is currently the beverage milk price is the higher of, each month, the beverage milk price is the higher of Class 3 or Class 4 milk. So when Class 4 is higher than Class 3, that's going to be the price that's used to determine the beverage milk price. When Class 3 is higher than Class 4, that's the price used to determine the beverage milk price. So under the current framework, farmers could choose whichever one's highest, and that may best reflect what's happening in the fluid milk market, or they could do a 50-50 split to spread that risk. There is a provision in the 2018 Farm Bills passed out of both the House and Senate. We've yet to see if it's going to make it through the conference committee, but if the Farm Bill and the provision to change the way beverage milk is priced is passed, then the fluid milk price will be based on the simple average of Class 3 and Class 4 milk. So if we see that Farm Bill change the beverage milk price, a farmer using dairy revenue protection could choose a class pricing option of 50-50 Class 3 and Class 4, and that will likely reflect the risk in the beverage milk market. Utilization of milk varies across the country. In the Southeast and Northeast, more of the milk is used to produce beverage milk products because those are the population centers. In the upper Midwest and in the West, more of the milk is used to produce storable dairy products or exportable dairy products. Think, for example, Wisconsin produces a lot of cheese. California produces a lot of dry milk powders and cheeses that are ultimately exported to our partners in Mexico and Asia. So farmers can try to align Dairy RP with the utilization of milk in their area if they're using a class pricing option. The other pricing option that they could use, again, is the component-based pricing option. And for the component pricing option, the dairy farmer will have available to them, when they buy a policy, they will know the average value of butterfat, protein, and other solids over the quarter. Those values will be determined based on CME, butter, cheese, and dry whey prices, and the USDA end product pricing formulas. So we will take the futures values, put them into the USDA formula, and farmers will then see what the market anticipated prices for butterfat, protein, and other solids will be. The farmer, using Dairy RP and using the component pricing option, will then select a declared butterfat and protein level. So for example, the minimum levels allowable under the policy are 3.5% fat and 3% protein. We keep other solids fixed because other solids do not vary considerably throughout the year. A lot of the variation in the milk composition is in the butterfat and the protein test percentages. So a farmer during a quarter when they anticipate lower component levels can choose a low component pricing option. When they anticipate that their component levels are going to be higher, say for example in the fall and winter months, they could choose to increase their declared butterfat and protein levels. The butterfat and protein levels range from 3.5% to 5% on the fat and 3% to 4% on protein. And as you can see here, as the farmers declare higher component values, the value of the milk used in the Dairy RP policy increases. So under this example, using these butterfat, protein, and other solids prices, the minimum component price that could be used for the policy is $14.55, but a farmer could scale that all the way up to $20.07. An important thing to remember is that the farmer is declaring these butterfat and protein levels. The declared component levels will also be used when we settle the policy. So we're not protecting against declines in the component production, we're protecting against a decline in the value of milk based on these component levels. I think that's a very, very important designation to make here. The other thing that we do is we're going to adjust the policy based on state level milk production. So at the time a policy is written, farmers will know what the expected milk production per cow is in their state or their pooled production region during the quarter in which they're going to insure. Once the quarter's over, USDA will publish milk production data for all 50 states. Those will be used, whether it's a state level policy or in a pooled production region, to determine the yield adjustment factor. So for example, if the expected milk per cow during the quarter of insurance is 5,000 pounds, but then after the quarter's over, we saw that the milk yield per cow was actually slightly higher, 5,100 pounds per cow for the quarter. Again, this is data published by USDA. We'll have a yield adjustment factor of 1.02%, which means that the indemnity, if there is one due to the dairy farmer, would be lower because the yield per animal has increased slightly. That's what makes this a revenue policy. Not only are we protecting against price declines, but we're protecting against changes in animal productivity. So when prices decline and milk per cow increases, the revenue decline is not as sharp and we're not indemnifying the full difference. However, if a price decline occurs and we also see that the milk per cow in the state also declined, that could mean that the yield adjustment factor would be less than 1 and we would end up with a higher indemnity due to the dairy farmer purchasing the policy. So let's go through a basic framework on how this works. Let's think about it. The guarantee, the actual revenue, and then the indemnity calculation. We'll go through these step by step. So let's say that the farmer's choice, they're going to have to choose a class or component option. So they're going to have a value of milk based on what's happening in the futures market. Then they're going to choose how much milk to cover, and then they're going to choose a coverage level, up to 95%. So let's do a revenue guarantee example. Assuming that the value of milk is $20 per hundredweight, the farmer's covering 1 million pounds of milk and choosing the 95% coverage option. That's going to be a revenue guarantee of $190,000 for the quarter. Now let's suppose that the actual milk price after the quarter's over, based on USDA published component values, and Class 3 and 4 milk prices was $17 per hundredweight, meaning that the milk price from the time the policy was purchased to the time we settled the policy fell by $3 per hundredweight. We used the same million pounds of milk that the farmer declared when they bought the policy. And then we have a yield adjustment factor. Here we're going to use 1.02%, similar to the example in the previous slide. That results in an actual calculated revenue of $173,400, which is below the revenue guarantee of $190,000. Thus, the indemnity that will be due to the dairy farmer would be $16,600. Had the yield adjustment factor been less than 1, then the indemnity due to the dairy farmer would have been higher. There's also something else that we've added to the policy, and that's an optional protection factor. The protection factor, default option's 1, but goes to 1.5, allowing a farmer to scale the dairy RP indemnity closer to the variability in milk production on their farm level. We know that milk production at the state level, average milk production, doesn't vary as much as what it does on the farm level. So for farmers that want to better capture the variability that they have on their farm and the revenue risk associated with that, they can use an optional protection factor to increase any indemnity that will be due to them in the event of a decline in revenue. That allows a farmer to more accurately align dairy RP with what's happening at their farm level. But again, the default protection factor is 1. That's the simple basics of how dairy RP works. It's very, very simple. As indicated, farmers have very, very few decisions to make. They choose how to value the milk in the policy, they choose how much milk to cover, and then they choose a coverage level. The important thing to remember too is that it's an actuarially appropriate. So the premiums are going to change every single day based on the market prices and the implied volatility in the market's expectation of risk. So premiums are generally going to be more affordable the closer a quarter is, and more expensive in the far out quarters. So nearby quarters are going to be much more affordable than your 5-quarter out policies because there's much more uncertainty on the direction of milk prices and milk revenue. Regardless, a farmer purchasing dairy RP based on their coverage level will receive a subsidy, a premium subsidy on their policy that ranges to 55% to 44%. Larger premium subsidies being associated with larger deductibles that a farmer will assume. Dairy RP will be sold on the state level in the top 23 milk producing states in the U.S. The top 23 states represent over 90% of the milk production in the U.S. In areas outside the top 23 dairy states, we will have those in pooled production regions. The pooled production regions will be available in the policy handbook. But farmers in the top 23 states will be able to buy a dairy RP policy based on their choice of a component or class pricing option, and then it will be indexed to what's happening in their individual state. We're very excited to bring dairy revenue protection to dairy farmers across America. Thank you very much for your time. I'm John Newton, Chief Economist with American Farm Bureau Federation.
Dr. Newton, I'm Steve Harris, the dairy farmer here in Tennessee. I don't exactly understand the state indexing on production level and how you get those numbers. Could you go through that again?
Sure. Brandon, could you repeat the question?
State indexing, production numbers. Explain that part.
So the way it works is because dairy revenue protection is a revenue-based product, not only do we have price protection, but we also have production risk that we cover. And the way we do that is by indexing at the state level. So there's an expected milk production per cow that the crop insurance agents will have when they write policies. And then we take the actual milk production based on the USDA mass milk production report. We divide the two. So actual what we're expecting, that becomes what's called the yield adjustment factor. Typically ranges between plus or minus 5%. And what that'll do is that'll move the revenue, actual revenue up or down, and reduce or increase the policy indemnity for dairy revenue protection. So it's meant to just move the revenue up or down on a quarterly basis to reflect what's happening in the state level. It's not based on an individual farmer's milk production. It's not based on total milk production, say, in the state of Tennessee. It's based on the milk production per cow from the USDA and AFBF. And again, that's what makes it an area-based revenue policy.
This is Steve Harrison again. I don't have any faith in those numbers, those nice numbers, because I don't have any faith on how they collect them in our state. I don't know about other states, but how would those numbers be collected in Tennessee? And count numbers, where do the count numbers come from?
You know, it's the USDA and AFBIS numbers at this point in time, that's the best information that we have with respect to that in order to make it an area-based policy. When we went through the review process, we were unable to make it a farm level policy. But in order to make it a revenue policy, we had to use the available information. So we did use the USDA and AFBIS numbers. Of course, given that this is launched as a pilot project, we'll be able to observe the performance of that over the first year. And if there's opportunities to make improvements to the product, we'll be able to do that as well.
Dr. Nick, Julie Walker here. How are you?
I'm doing pretty good. Nice to hear you.
Not on Twitter. I've got a question about NAS averages relating to production per herd. We've got a fairly low NAS average in this state, production per herd or per cow. We know of several herds whose production exceeds 80 pounds a day average. How will those NAS numbers relate to those high producing herds? And we are not one of the 23 top states. We're in that second tier of states.
So the states outside the top 23 will be grouped in the pool production region. So that further averages out the state indexing. One of the things that we have to address that is what's called a protection factor. So if your farm level milk production is more variable than the average level that we're observing in the policy, then you can add a protection factor close to 1 to 1.5. And what that does is, in the event of an indemnity, you can increase the policy indemnity back to the dairy farm. And that's meant to reflect the fact that farm level milk production risk is a lot more variable than what we observe at the state or production region. I'll add, however, Julie, that one thing that we did observe, just going back in time, a lot of the indemnities that are going to be triggered are going to be price-based triggers, meaning that it's going to be a function of large declines in the milk price versus the expected value of milk. It's really what's going to drive improvements. While you do have that state level milk component, milk production factor, milk yield factor, it's the price that's really going to be driving a lot of these indemnities. At least historically, that's what we've seen.
Anybody else have any questions?
Todd True with Farm Service Agency. Kind of curious how this insurance, are they going to be able to have the Farm Service Program, the MPP, in conjunction with this insurance risk management program?
That's an excellent question, and as a matter of fact, they will. The MPP program is a margin-based tool, which means it protects, I guess, the difference in the milk price and feed costs. And that's a different source of risk than what we're covering here with dairy RP. So they will be able to use both products simultaneously. A good example of that would be a farmer using or up to 5 million pounds of milk. Depending on what we see out of the farm bill, you tier 1 coverage, and then layer on top of that dairy RP to provide additional risk protection. There's no restriction from USDA on the ability to use both programs.
Dr. Newton, excuse me, Dr. Newton. My name is Maurice Tilley. Can you hear me now?
Yes, Mr. Maurice, I'm here.
Oh, okay, Maurice Tilley, I'm a dairy farmer also. My most interesting question, I guess, or what intrigues me most about this program and the installation of it, is there going to be someone available that can advise us as dairy farmers on what kind of levels to use? We as dairy farmers are not economists nor up on what's going on in some of the money things with the milk process and everything. We're going to have some kind of advisory staff or some kind of help to advise us on what to do here. And the second part of this question is this going to be terribly expensive? Is it going to be affordable? Will we be able to buy this protection?
So, Mr. Maurice, so the first part of your question on whether or not there's going to be an advisory service, this is different than the Farm Service Agency product where and I was part of that project to roll out a decision tool for farmers to help them make an MPP decision. In this case, it's and we designed this. I mean, Mr. Donovan was part of our Farm Bill working group many years ago when we started thinking about this idea. We made it to be pretty easy to understand. So if you're a dairy farmer and you can see the value of milk on a daily basis, there in Tennessee, you guys are probably paid on skim fat, not on the components, unless you're moving out of the order. But let's say we get the Farm Bill passed and they change the way Class 1 milk is priced, then the risk in the Southeast market is really going to be 50-50 Class 3, Class 4, because it's a fluid market. But at the same extent, if you're paid based on components, you can elect those component levels. If you're a high component producing herd, even in the Southeast, you do have a higher uniform butterfat value. So you can try to lock in the higher value of butterfat. But we designed it to try to be pretty easy to understand, meaning you pick a value of milk, you pick the components, and that's going to be what drives the policy. It's not like LGM where you need to pick your feed ration. It's not like MPP where you have 144 different coverage options. Really, it all boils down to how you value the milk, what the value of milk is over that quarter that you're protecting. I think it's fairly easy to understand when you sit down and really look at the numbers. But I'm sure that there are going to be university folks out there that try to build some decision tools. But I would encourage folks not to overcomplicate this. It really is about the value of milk that you're insuring over that quarter. That's really what's going to be what drives the policy. Mr. Maurice, the second part of your question was on premiums. So one of the things that's great about this, being that it's a federal crop insurance product, is that it carries a subsidy from the federal government. So if you purchased a Cadillac coverage option of 95% coverage level, that carries a 44% premium subsidy. So if the premium actuarially appropriate was around 20 cents, then you're going to pay slightly more than 10 cents a hundredweight to get the policy. And what we've seen historically for that 95% coverage level are premiums in those nearby quarters that range anywhere between 5 and 10 cents per hundredweight. And as you get further and further out, it's going to obviously get more expensive because there's more risk in the market. But you have to see a premium level that is more expensive than the $8 MPP coverage was originally, which was close to 50 cents per